All right, well, let's finish up our texts this week about Reconstruction. And we're going to look at one more little text this week called Unbroken Line. And so we see here in this picture, we see what looks like maybe used to be a train track of some kind and some buildings. It's all been destroyed, hasn't it? It's been destroyed in the Civil War, probably from cannon fire and the fighting and bombs, whatever they might have done, blown these things up so this train couldn't go. Well, let's read about this and find out more. Reconstruction was a bitter time in the South. Southern cities such as Atlanta, Richmond, and Savannah had been destroyed. Most Southerners who had money and property before the war lost it during the war. People who had fought for the Confederacy were angry when the federal government sent the U.S. Army south to register former slaves to vote. In some parts of the South, this meant that former slaves made up a majority of the registered voters during Reconstruction. Remember, you had like one farmer, one plantation owner, he might have 100 or 200 slaves. And so there were a lot of slaves in the South, and when they got the right to vote, that gave a lot of men the right, who used to be slaves, the right to vote. There might have even been more black men than white men. That's why they're getting these offices. They get to vote for one another. Many Southerners took action to try to prevent former slaves from voting. In 1867, a group of former Confederate soldiers started an organization, we read about this yesterday, called the Ku Klux Klan, or 2 days ago, rather. It grew, and before long, Klansmen all over the South were putting on white sheets at night and riding around the countryside, trying to intimidate African Americans from voting. Klan members sometimes beat African Americans, as well as some Northerners who came south after the war to try to teach former slaves. Congress passed a law giving President Grant power to deal with the Klan. The federal government arrested many Klansmen, especially in Georgia and the South, and South Carolina, rather. As a result, the original Ku Klux Klan was disbanded by 1872, but violence intended to keep African Americans from voting continued. By 1875, it was clear that white Southerners still weren't ready to accept former slaves as equals. However, the former Confederate states had all been readmitted to the Union. Many Northerners had gotten tired of dealing with the South. After the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were added to the Constitution, some Northerners felt as if they had done all they could to help former slaves. In 1877, after a close presidential election, President Rutherford B. Hayes pulled all the troops out of the South. He did this as part of an agreement known as the Compromise of 1877. Remember, the Southern states agreed to recognize President Rutherford as the winner of the election as long as he got rid of the troops in the South. That was part of the compromise. During the next few years, Southern states passed new laws meant to keep black people from voting. Many states passed literacy tests, which said you had to read to vote. Others passed taxes on voting.
Again, we're going to
hold 1 second.
today go back and start a 2-day review of what we.
There we go. Sorry about that. My computer started talking to me from a recording. In the years after, let me start right here again. Remember, we just said they had to pass literacy tests to vote. They had to read to vote. Others passed taxes on voting, known as poll taxes, which were meant to stop poor people from voting. In the years after the Compromise of 1877, Southern states also passed a series of laws which mandated the segregation of white people and black people at all levels of society. These became known as the Jim Crow laws. They required that people be segregated or separated by race on public transportation, such as train coaches and streetcars. In other words, white people and black people couldn't ride on the same train together. They wanted to separate them. Some of these laws would remain in place for nearly a century and relegated African Americans to a form of second-class citizenship. In fact, a lot of the matters left over from Reconstruction would not be dealt with until the civil rights, and I'm going to hold on right there. Here's a cartoon in the 1874 edition of Harper's Magazine, shows how rough things were for recently freed slaves in the South after the Civil War. Look what's going on. It's just this intimidation, guns, and The Ku Klux Klan wearing the white sheets on their heads. They've got hold a skull here. Yeah, they're saying it's going to be worse than slavery for you. It's very sad, but can you see what's in this picture here? They're hanging a slave, former slave. Scary, scary stuff. Bad stuff that was happening. So a lot of it didn't get fixed, it said, till the civil rights movement a century later. In 1876, the United States celebrated its 100th anniversary with the addition of the state of Colorado. This brought the number of states to 38, and for the first time, connected states on the West Coast, states on the East Coast. The Union was not perfect, but at least the states were united, north to south, east to west, and at least slavery had ended as well. All righty then. Well, that finishes up all of our texts for this week. You do have some questions from today's text to answer. And then tomorrow we're going to go back and kind of review the Reconstruction period with some fun little videos, okay? All right, get your questions answered. We'll talk to you soon.